All right. So yeah, this whole topic of law and grace, I've been wrestling with this over several weeks now, because this is one of those topics where what we say on a Sunday morning in the safety of a church sanctuary may be different than how we live out in the world, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. Our starting point, and this is just a launching pad. I have to have a starting slide, and this is what I did. We're talking about the man healed at the pool, paralyzed for 38 years. Jesus came along, said, "Do you want to be made well?" He healed him. It was the Sabbath. That was strike number one. Not only did the healing take place on the Sabbath, but Jesus told the man to pick up his mat and walk on the Sabbath. And at least as the Sabbath had developed over the centuries, that was a violation of the Sabbath. The rabbis had promulgated rules basically saying that lifting anything that is bigger than a dried fig constitutes carrying a burden. And in Jeremiah, he says, "You shall not carry any burden on the Sabbath." So if you pick up anything bigger than a dried fig, you're carrying a burden. And other rabbis had different takes on that, but this was one of the views. And so the religious leaders, and I give them some, I at least am willing to accept their zeal and their desire to serve God, their desire to figure out, okay, is this man the Messiah? He's claiming to be the Messiah. Well, the Messiah isn't going to be a lawbreaker. He's not going to sin. The Messiah isn't going to break the Sabbath. And so, I'll be honest, if I were living back then, I'd be thinking along those same lines. And yet Jesus broke the Sabbath. Now, in the 21st century, even in the 20th century, I span both of them, but in the 20th century, 21st century Christianity, it's easy for us to pick on the Pharisees about the Sabbath. Because even in our Christian faith, we have never taken the Sabbath as seriously as the Jews have. Many of us, for whatever reason, have to work on the Lord's Day. Keep in mind, okay, the Sabbath for Jews is Saturday. With Christianity, it got shifted to Sunday because that was the day that Jesus rose from the dead, so it became the Lord's Day. And I remember when I came to Christ as an 18-year-old, I had a job working at an ice cream parlor. We were situated about a half a mile away from Rex Humbard's Cathedral of Tomorrow, big mega church in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio. He was a televangelist. He had TV shows. And this is back in the day when you had both Sunday morning services and Sunday evening services. For our ice cream parlor, we loved the Cathedral of Tomorrow. Sunday was our busiest day. And while all of those folks were observing their Sabbath, I was working on mine. And I worked every Sunday because it was our busiest day. Now, I worked it out with the boss so that I could have Saturdays off. I wanted at least one day. The other days I was going to school. I was still in college. And so it's been easy for us to be much more relaxed about Sabbath. So much so that we have often lost sight of the purpose of the Sabbath, and we can just drive ourselves into stress, depression, and anxiety because we're overworking ourselves, not giving ourselves the rest that God designed our bodies to have. And I learned that the hard way myself. But it's easy for us to pick on the Sabbath. But there are a whole lot of other laws in the Old Testament that we cling to perhaps a little bit more zealously than the Sabbath laws. And it's not too difficult for us in our minds and our thoughts to judge others that we think might be violating some other area of the Mosaic Law. And just as an illustration, it was interesting, my preparation for Sunday school is kind of weird. I think about lessons 2 or 3 weeks in advance, and then Friday evening and Saturday, I'm scrambling to put it all together. And I've been thinking about this lesson for several weeks. And it was while we were up in Indiana for Carrie Lyman's wedding. We were staying at a Drury Inn in Lafayette, Indiana. Wonderful place. If you ever go to Lafayette, stay at the Drury. It's a great hotel. And while we were there, we were checking in. And as we were checking in, they were having a conference on site. And the conference, now, I don't have a slide. I should have put this up on a slide because the name of the conference is kind of long. It's called the Conference for Graduate Women and Gender Minorities in Physics. I mean, it's a mouthful. And I thought, what in the world is this about? I didn't have the guts to go ask anybody. But as the day went on and the weekend went on, I got some food for Sunday school. So I thought, okay, I'm going to use this. The Conference for Graduate Women and Gender Minorities in Physics. So I found their website, went to their website, and essentially what it is, it's a group that's dedicated to increase opportunities for women and gender minorities in the field of physics. As you can imagine, physics is probably a fairly male-dominated field. One of those STEM fields. And so this group is trying to increase opportunities for graduate women and gender minorities. And it was that phrase, gender minorities, that caught my attention. I'm sitting there, and as soon as I see that, and I see their name tags, they're all wearing a lanyard with their name. And right below their name is their preferred pronouns. And I'm seeing he, she, or she, her, I'm seeing they, them, I'm seeing all this stuff. And so all of the issues that are dividing Americans and Christians start flooding into my brain, and now I start feeling like one of the Pharisees dealing with the Sabbath. I'm dealing with a different issue. But my proof texts for my issues back in Leviticus. And I'm wrestling with this, and I'm thinking, how do I feel about these folks? And that really hit me. One evening we got on the elevator, and we're riding up the elevator, and a couple of them came on with their lanyards, and I'm seeing they, them, and she, her, and I'm sitting there thinking, how do I feel about what I'm seeing? And B, how should I feel about what I'm seeing? And C, I'm Christ's representative in this hotel. What, if anything, should I be saying or doing in this whole situation? And it was kind of interesting because there were several other people from our home church in Ohio who were attending the wedding, staying at the hotel, and we were chit-chatting a little bit about it at breakfast, and there was similar conflicts going on in our soul. And I realized that at least in my natural thought processes, I wasn't too far away from these Pharisees dealing with the Sabbath. I just had a different issue that I was dealing with, a different way of being judgmental. And the thought that occurred to me that I really started to think about was how much, even as a good evangelical Christian, I love law. I love rules. And I think that's more universal than just me. Now, I realize I probably love them more than the rest of y'all because my background, I grew up with rules. I was a good boy. I followed the rules. And I developed a great appreciation for rules, regulations, and laws. Because laws set boundaries for us. And there is safety in boundaries. You know, we always hear psychologists tell us that our young children, they really like it when we set down the law. They may rebel against it, but they may argue against it, but they really do appreciate it. They know that there's safety within those rules. Okay? I remember as a teenager driving down to Florida, we stopped off at Stone Mountain on the way. And we're up on the top of Stone Mountain. And you know, the defining characteristic of Stone Mountain is the very gradual slope that goes over the side. And at the time, they had a little booklet. I've got it, still have it at home. There was a guy whose job it was to rescue people who had gone too far over the side of the mountain. Well, I'm a 15-year-old hotshot, and I'm seeing the slope, and I'm walking, and about 5 feet down further, I see this yellow line that is painted around the perimeter of the top of the mountain. And then another 10 feet beyond that is a chain link fence. And then there's a little sign painted on the pavement, "Do not cross this yellow line or you will not get up." Well, what's a 15-year-old kid going to do? You know, I'm going to test the boundaries. I just put 1 foot across and I got back up, but it was hard. I mean, they really had that yellow line painted way down. If I were them, I would have painted it 50 feet higher up. But we like boundaries. We like the safety that we get with the boundaries set by law, and we like that. Yeah, Allison. Yeah. It is interesting. I remember reading about those studies with glass tables and babies. It's interesting. The other thing that law does is it gives us a feeling of control. And here's what I mean by that. If I know that if I obey the law, good things are going to happen to me, and if I disobey the law, bad things are going to happen to me, what that really tells me is my well-being is in my hands. My well-being is under my control. Okay? That's what it's telling me. A couple weeks ago, we were talking about how Jews saw the healing miracles. And as we saw in the story of the man born blind, you know, who sinned that this man was born blind? There was a strong belief in first century Judaism that all misfortune is the result of sin. In other words, your misfortune is your fault. And your good fortune is to your credit. I kind of like hearing that, because now I know I can control the outcome of my life. I can do the right things and good things will happen. If I do the bad things will happen. I know, I just won't do bad things. I'll do good things. It gives me a feeling of control, and we like being in control. It also soothes our sense of justice. It soothes our sense of justice, and what I mean by that is we know that bad things happen to good people and good things happen to bad people. But in our love of law, we like thinking that if you do the right things, then your life will go well. And so when we see somebody suffering, our first thought process goes, well, what could they have done differently in their life to avoid this suffering? You know, I don't want to beat myself up too much, but you know, when I see somebody standing on the side of the road panhandling, my first thought is get a job. Okay? You're panhandling because you don't want to get a job. Now I have no idea why they're panhandling. They may have a very good reason to panhandle. Although up in Ohio there was a reporter who decided to look into it. And for a lot of guys, panhandling is their job. And they have learned to, I mean, one guy, this was like 20 years ago at least that this article came out. One of the panhandlers was making $60,000 a year panhandling. I assume it was tax-free. And so he was making even more. And it was just, and they would get territorial. They'd have their street corners that were theirs, and it just became their job. And so, but a sense of law soothes our sense of justice when we can say, okay, I'm doing well because I followed the rules. You're not doing well because you didn't follow the rules. There's a sense of soothing there. But through all of this, at the end of the day, and this is what I think Jesus is trying to get at, is that the law can enslave us. And certainly I am one of the people that it has enslaved over the years. There's a concept in the law known as the black letter law. The black letter law. This is what lawyers argue about and fight over. But basically the idea of black letter law is it is law that is very clearly written, very clearly put forth in a statute somewhere that you can look at, you can read, you can understand it, and bada bing. Well, what happens is you can't read it and understand it, and you fight over it. There was a definition of law. Let me see if I can remember it. My aunt, who had a wonderful sense of humor, found this. Law is nothing but common sense, written in words that make no sense. So we have to hire lawyers to argue their sense before judges who will have to decide which lawyer made the most sense. And so it's a very accurate description of law. But it enslaves us in a lot of different ways. And one of the things that I've discovered is how it has enslaved even the Jewish people. I mean, look at what the rabbis went through. How enslaved can you get when you are spending hours and spilling gallons of ink and wasting sheets of papyrus trying to determine what constitutes a burden that you're not supposed to carry on the Sabbath? Those guys were so enslaved. We're constantly looking for loopholes. And it's easy to find them. Because it's amazing when you think about it what the law doesn't say. And let me just hearken back to our study of Song of Songs. And we were studying that, and throughout that whole study, one of the things I was very fascinated by were the different attitudes of the Jewish culture and the Christian culture when it came to marriage and physical intimacy. And those attitudes, they were very, 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 very different, to the point that there are many Jewish scholars, even in the rabbinical age, all the way up to the present day, who are very quick to point out that while Leviticus very clearly prohibits same-gender activity by men, it says nothing about same-gender activity by women. And that has resulted in a whole host of different ways of viewing activities in the Jewish world, because Leviticus says nothing about it. There are a lot of sexual behaviors that Leviticus says nothing about. And so the rabbis are wrestling with themselves, because instead of trying to see the spirit of the scriptures, to see the spirit of what God meant when he said, "For this cause a man shall leave his mother and father and cleave to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh," instead of looking at that spirit and seeing what all of that, where all that leads us, they're focusing in on the black letter law of Leviticus. And it's amazing what Leviticus doesn't say. Yeah, Ron.
Yeah, I'm reading Leviticus right now. It's part of my
Okay.
daily duties. And, but we have to remember, too, that because of the structure, it's holding men accountable. Whether they're son or husband, grandpa, or whatever. So it's putting the weight of accountability. It's not letting the women go scot-free. It's just the way it's structured and the way they look at their society. And it's just like Moses when they went out of Egypt. All you know is the number of men.
Right,
But
right,
you know there's women and children.
right,
And
right.
they are important to society. But it's because of that structure putting responsibility on men.
Right, right.
It's directed them.
Yeah, as Ron points out, and let me just paraphrase it for the folks online. I mean, the Old Testament is very male-oriented in general, in the sense that most of the commands and most of what is said is directed at men. And there are some thoughts out there that women weren't fully considered people with the rights of human beings. There's a lot. There's so much going on that even today Jews can't agree on why it is that everything is so directed at men in the Old Testament, but it's there. Another way that it enslaves us, and going back to the Song of Songs, thinking of law and spirit, throughout that study, my scrupulosity-infused brain constantly struggled and wrestled with the fact that 90% of today's scholars will tell you that in an honest reading of the Song of Songs, these two lovers who are all over each other probably aren't married, at least not until maybe the end of chapter 4. They're doing a lot of things that I would not approve of for unmarried people. And I'm wrestling with that and wrestling with that and wrestling with that. And yet, as I'm wrestling with that, as I'm so focused on the legal status of their relationship, I'm letting myself lose sight of what God is trying to display in this song, the heart of what God is trying to display. Despite the legalities of whatever they may have gone through, throughout the song, the female is saying, "My beloved is mine and I am his." My beloved is mine and I am his. She says it 3 different times in 3 different ways. I am my beloved's and he is mine. I am my beloved's and his desire is for me. She says it 3 different times throughout the song. And whether that included the justice of the peace and the marriage license and rings, that's marriage language. That is the heart of marriage language. And the rabbis saw that. They saw the laws in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, and they made ways for people to become betrothed and to get married without going through the normal legal channels. And so there's a heart of marriage, even in a situation where there maybe wasn't the legalities of marriage. Now, I know that's that makes me hinky to even say, and y'all may not want to be hearing that, especially those of you out there, I don't see anybody. Well, yes, I do see somebody who may have teenage daughters, may not like hearing me talk like this, but it's there. This is about heart language. And we can get enslaved to the law. And what happens is when I focus on laws, when I focus on loopholes, when I focus on, what does the law require, what does the law prohibit? Well, if it doesn't prohibit it, well, I can do it, whatever it is, and all this stuff. I'm missing the heart of what God's trying to teach us because I'm asking the wrong questions. Let me go back to our study from several months ago, many months ago. we're looking at our spiritual paradigms, and, it's no secret. I'm way up here. I am way up here. I'm as far northeast on that quadrant as you can get. And that's where I have lived my life. Some of that is personality, some of that is who I am. Others in our church are down here. I know people in our church who are over here. And where we are has an effect on how we deal with law. Let me share a story. April 18th, 1986. No, not 18th, 28th. April 28th, 1986, around 10:30 at night, Carol is pregnant with our first child, Bethany. And we had been out for the evening to a social event, and she's not due for another 2 weeks. But she's looking at herself, and she says, does the baby look lower to you? And I said, yeah, it does. I said, you know what, tomorrow would be a great day to have this baby because I don't have anything in court. So I said, this would be a great time. So we get home. It's about 10:30 or so. And sorry, Carol, I don't want to embarrass you, but her water broke. Her water breaks. We call the doctor. Now, first child, if you've all seen the episode of Dick Van Dyke where Richie's coming, I'm Dick, okay? Let's get out of here. Let's get going. We got to go. And so we call the doctor, and he says, okay, you're going to have the baby in the next 24 hours, one way or the other. It's going to come. But don't go to the hospital yet. Now, we live a half hour away from the hospital, and he's telling me to put on the brakes. My wife's water just broke. I'm not putting on brakes. And he says, and we say, why? He says, well, if you wait till after midnight, you won't get charged for another day's stay in the hospital. So, okay, we're going to wait. Well, in that ensuing hour and a half, Carol starts feeling some labor pains, and my anxiety level heightens. So finally, like at 12:01, we get in the car, and we start heading out. Now, 12:01 in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio. My car is the only car on the road. Nobody's there. Coming up to the first intersection, and there's a red light. I'm a good law-abiding citizen. I pull up, and I stop. And I'm sitting there, and I'm thinking, I am an idiot. My wife is in labor, and I'm sitting here simply because somebody wrote a law 50 years earlier saying, thou shalt not run a red light. There's nobody on the road. There are no police officers. I'm the only person here. So I fought against my OCD, fought against my scrupulosity, put it in gear, and I went. Carol didn't even know. She was oblivious. I told her later that I ran the red light. She goes, I don't believe you. So I ran the red light. That was hard for me to do because I live up here. And as I've been growing, and since we did that study, I've been pushing myself with God pulling myself down here. Because living as a theologian scholar in the paradigm of language, my whole world is no bigger than the words I can use to describe it. And my God is no bigger than the words I can use to describe him. That's not good. I don't like that. At least the contemplative mystics, they realize that our brains are pretty puny things. It's amazing what we can do with our brains. But in trying to conceive the inconceivable, they're pretty useless. And this is what I think Jesus is trying to do through the Gospels. As I think about it more and more and more, especially this Gospel of John, he's really all about life in the Spirit. Living in the Spirit and living in such a way that we capture the heart of God, even though my brain cannot describe that heart in words. As St. Augustine said, as soon as you think you understand, it's not God. Whatever you think you understand, it's not God. Because God is not limited by the size of my words. And so I'm working my way down there, down in there, and I'm just reading a lot of really cool stuff. I think it's kind of ironic that my approach to learning about mysticism is to use words, books. Yeah.
I think a lot of us men are up in that corner, and that's the very reason that I think I like the devotional classics. Because the mystic is trying to express things that we intellectually know,
Yeah.
but we don't all understand as far as God is concerned.
No, yeah, Ron just made a great point. I want to make sure this gets out there. For all you guys who have nothing to do on the first Saturday of most months, April is our next one. We have our men's breakfast, and we've been going through this wonderful book, The Devotional Classics. And it's a great book put together by a modern-day contemplative mystic, Richard Foster. And it's a collection of writings of some of the great fathers of the faith. And we have some really good discussions. It's a great time. But Ron is right. I don't want to get sexist about this, but let's appreciate biological reality. We're different, okay? I've done some research on the hormonal differences. You ladies have about 10 times more oxytocin in your body than we men do. And that makes you far, far more relational, cuddly, warm, fuzzy than we are. We have a whole bunch more testosterone in our bodies than you do, okay? And that makes us more aggressive, more forceful, all the things that you don't like. And so it's just this way we're made. And so a lot of us are up here. And it's good for us to get in touch with different ways of perceiving life. I'm talking about the paradigm of language, the paradigm of feelings. You know, the charismatic lovers down here in the paradigm of feelings. You know, so as the theologian, as I'm sitting at that red light, I'm saying to myself, what does the law say? The law says sit here and wait. The lover charismatic is saying, how do you feel about that? I feel pretty guilty if I go through it. You know, the servant crusader who lives in the paradigm of action is saying, punch it. Get through this light and get your wife to the hospital. I'm still not sure what the mystic is saying at that point. You know, just be.
Put on your emergency flashers and put the pedal to the metal.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we got there. It is what it is. It is what it is. We got there, and Bethany made us wait until 20 till 10 in the morning, and so.
When we had to rush our infant daughter to the hospital, I didn't care about anybody in front of me, around me, traffic lights, or anything. My daughter was in the back seat, not breathing.
Oh yeah.
I had to get her to the emergency room. We walked in the emergency room, and the nurse came up and grabbed her out of my arms without us even going to the bed. I wasn't going to let anything stop me from getting my daughter there, including the guy in front of me who decided that he was going to slow down because I was driving close.
Yep. Yeah, you know, that happens when we're driving. We've done a lot of travel lately, and every now and then you see somebody fly by you at, 85, 90 miles an hour or more. And my initial reaction is, what a jerk. And then I think, maybe he's in Phil's situation. Maybe he's got, somebody in that car that needs to get to the hospital right now. And so I try to be a little bit more gracious. Yes, Steve? Yeah. Steve shares about a guy following him with a fireman's hat. I mean, people have legitimate emergencies, so I have to remind myself not to be too quick to judge the idiot driver. Maybe he's got a legitimate emergency. Yeah, Matt.
Well, at least my progression, my talking about the theologian scholar, when I was younger, I was trying to put together all the rules, trying to figure out everything. I said, how are you supposed to do this? And so I built this logical construct so that it made sense to me. But then I started encountering with some other folks that don't follow the exact same logical construct. And then I started looking at that and I said, if I have to be honest about it, can I really be 100% sure they're not right? Because if you read it the way they read it, and you interpret things the way they interpret it, can they do that legitimately and still be? So I think, well, in this thing, maybe I'm not 100% sure on this. I'm only 80% sure on this. And there's something coming about, I'm 99% sure, but it just doesn't say it outright. So my logic brought me to the point where I said, well, how much of this do I really know? How much of these rules that I just kind of follow all my life? But it's really not written down. Then I started reading and said, that's not really something, it's not firm. That's not a rule. It's something I kind of built because I've read this, and this. And what it did is it brought me closer back down towards that mystic, contemplative. I don't really know this 100% sure. Then I start wondering, what are the things that I don't know that I don't know?
What?
So it's
Yeah.
pulling me that way.
Well, what do I not know that I don't know that I don't know? I mean, we don't know what we don't know. Yeah, I mean, and Matt makes a good point. What he just expressed here is what Paul expressed both in Romans and in 1 Corinthians, that people think differently than we do. So much of this whole study about this healing on the Sabbath relates to Jesus' underlying message throughout the Gospels. Stop judging one another. Stop judging one another. I mean, even if I want to live up there in the Northeast theologian scholar quadrant for my own life, even if I want to learn all the rules so that I know how to live for myself and for the Lord, that's far different than me imposing my rule that I'm 75% sure about on somebody else. And that's what Jesus is getting at here. We live in a world of 8 billion people. And 2 weeks ago in Lafayette, Indiana, some of those 8 billion people wanted to be called they, them. And am I going to judge them? What am I going to think and feel about them? Jesus tells me what to think and feel about them. Love them. What does that look like? I have no ideas. I'm standing on that elevator with these two folks. I'm sitting there thinking in my mind, Father, how do you want me to show your love right now? And all I could think of was, as they got off the elevator, have a great day. And maybe that was it. That was all I could do. So what Jesus is doing here with the Gospels, and this is at the heart of the Gospels, although it's not always explicitly said. Matt makes a good point. There's a lot of things that aren't explicitly said. And there's so much in the underlying story of Scriptures that is sort of between the lines, in the shadows. You got to get to it. I've been focusing a lot lately in my own walk with God about the theme of the Scriptures is oneness. You know, in the beginning, everything was good. There was oneness in the garden, oneness between God and Adam, between Adam and Eve. There was oneness. That oneness was broken with the fall, and the rest of the Bible is about how to restore oneness. That's it. We are restoring oneness. And we're all on that journey of oneness. For those of us who are married, we're on that journey of oneness in our marriage. You know, we don't instantly become one when we say I do. We start on that journey of oneness, and we're constantly growing closer and closer and closer together. But there is still ways in which we are still two, still becoming one. We are on that journey of oneness back to the Father. And this is the whole sanctification process that we're going on. Well, all of this is a fulfillment of the new covenant. Okay, our Bibles, we have the Old Testament and the New Testament. The Old Testament is so called because it is the old covenant between God and Israel, based on the Mosaic law. The New Testament is the new covenant in the person of Jesus. And that new covenant was prophesied by Jeremiah. And we're in the fulfillment of this, and I can't wait for you guys to get like to Hebrews 9 and 10, 3 or 4 years from now, when you guys finally get there. Indeed, a time is coming. This is in Jeremiah 31 verses, I got 3 slides. This is a big passage. I got 3 slides of it. We're just going to read all the way through it. Indeed, as time is coming, says the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the people of Israel and Judah. It will not be like the old covenant that I made with their ancestors when I delivered them from Egypt, that old covenant of black letter law written on tablets. For they violated that covenant, even though I was like a faithful husband to them, says the Lord. But I will make a new covenant with the whole nation of Israel after I plant them back in the land, says the Lord. I will put my law within them and write it on their hearts and minds. I will be their God, and they will be my people. People will no longer need to teach their neighbors and relatives to know me. For all of them, from the least important to the most important, will know me, says the Lord. For I will forgive their sin and will no longer call to mind the wrong they have done. Wow. Written several hundred years before Christ. This is the new covenant that Jesus is ushering in. And this is why he's having so many conflicts with the scribes and the Pharisees, because they are clinging to the old, and he's trying to bring in the new. Let me ask y'all a question. I always ask this of my students. I teach business law and criminal justice over at the college. And one question I always ask my students that I love to get their responses to is this. Can society exist without laws? Can society exist without laws? I'm seeing not well. Megan, I see you nodding. Do you mind sharing what you're thinking? I'm sorry, I don't mean to pick on you. Okay, be a whole mess. Ron?
No human society in this world exists without laws.
Okay, no human society in this world exists without laws. Okay. I mean, it's sort of a trick question, depending on how you want to look at it. I love asking my students trick questions. The students out there are wondering, what kind of professor is this?
I'm answering from an answer.
I don't grade this question. It's just I accept a lot of wide range of answers to this question. Here's the deal. We have laws against murder in America. How many of you out there need a law against murder to keep from killing somebody? Okay, Allison's honest back there saying, depends on the day. How many of us actually need a law written on the books to avoid burglarizing somebody's house? There are a lot of things we know in our heart. We have no inclination. Now, obviously, a fallen society cannot live without laws, because we have to have some way of compelling people to live at peace. Go ahead, Ron, then Allison, and then
law
Ruth.
hasn't been erased. Law has been put in our hearts by the new covenant.
Yes.
But the law erased.
Okay? Law hasn't been erased, it's been put into our hearts. I'm going to push back just a little bit that what has been put into our hearts goes beyond the law that was written in the Old Testament. Yeah, Allison. Yes, Ruth, you had your hand up. Yeah, yeah.
Take a catalytic converter right out of the car.
From a church parking lot, people take a catalytic converter. And you talk about boundaries. I mean, what about a dog who comes into your garage and steals your soccer ball? Let's talk about that. Okay. Okay, Margaret. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I grew up in Central America, Mexico, and you really, really, really did not need your car. But the problem is, if your tires were taken and all these things were taken from Mexico, whatever else they could get their hands on, you could go to the Peace Market and buy it back. And they would make a profit.
Yep.
I mean, I'm not sure that they were taking this right either.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, but yeah, there are different standards of living, different standards of behavior throughout the world, and you're right. I know when my daughter and I went to the Dominican Republic, we were advised about different standards of conduct that they had. We went there and we were talking to some Dominicans in the town square right outside the Catholic Church. And one of the boys asked us, "Why has that guy over there got an earring?" I mean, one of our guys in our group had an earring in his ear. And I said, "Well, in America, guys have earrings. They don't in the Dominican." And he thought that was really weird. And so, I don't know, different cultures. Yeah. Yeah.
This was a Saturday, on the weekend, no one was working, but they were going to be doing some light changes at a little teeny house outside of the parking lot, and they literally left like 4 boxes of really expensive lights on the ground, and they were there all weekend, and I'm asking them, like, who in their right mind? I mean, it's on land, who bought them, why can't I just pick it up? They're like, I don't need them.
Yeah.
But part of me's like, wow, but it's right there, you know?
Yep. Yep. Different cultures, a lot of different things. Let me close this off. We're almost out of time. Let me close this off with one more verse. And this is in John 1, and this I believe is John's way of showing how, at least in part, Jesus is ushering in that new covenant that Jeremiah speaks about. It talks about a whole lot more in Hebrews, where it talks about a covenant being sealed by blood. Jeremiah's covenant had never been sealed by blood until Jesus shed it on the cross. That was the sealing of blood for that covenant, which is why I believe Jesus says on the cross, "It is finished." He is finally sealing that covenant. So, John 1, "Now the Word became flesh and took up residence among us. We saw his glory, the glory of the one and only, full of grace and truth, who came from the Father. For the law was given through Moses, but grace and truth came about through Jesus Christ." And here Jesus is showing us the essence of the new covenant. It is a new covenant based on grace and truth. Remember back in the last line of what we read in Jeremiah, "I will forgive their sins and remember them no more." There's the grace of that new covenant. And yet, it is all too easy for me to remember sins, and not only my own, but everybody else's, and to point them out and to talk about it, what everybody's doing wrong. And Jesus is doing a separation here. The law that was given through Moses, it's over here, grace and truth coming about through Jesus. And as we see in the Gospels over and over again, anytime Jesus had to make a choice between law and grace and truth, he always chose grace and truth. We'll come back in 3 weeks. Okay, next 2 weeks, we're going to have international workers up here for Sunday school. So in 3 weeks, we'll come back. We'll eventually get to the story of the woman caught in adultery, in which Jesus explains all this. Okay. Yes, okay, yeah. For those of you online, the next 2 weeks, Sunday school will not be streamed online. We're going to have some international workers from sensitive areas. And so the next 2 Sundays will not be streamed. So if you're looking for it and you don't find it, there's nothing wrong with your computer. So yeah, next 2 weeks will be international workers for our missions festival. And then we'll come back in 3 weeks and pick this back up. And there's so much more to say about this whole topic. Let me pray. Jesus, we do thank you. We thank you for ushering in the new covenant of grace and truth. And I pray that you will drive that covenant deep into the depths of our hearts and give us grace to love and accept people who don't live the way we think they should. And give us the grace to even stop thinking about whether or not they're living the way we think they should. Help us to be your ambassadors, spreading the same grace and love that you did when you were here. Father, I pray that you'll be with us now as we go into the service. We thank you for the worship team. Pray that you will be with them as they guide us into worship. I pray that you'll be with Pastor, or actually with our DS, as he brings us the message, sharing about the Alliance in the South. And I just thank you for all this. I pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.